In the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, life unfolded at a predictable rhythm. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, and secrets were as rare as snowfall in July. But all that changed one crisp autumn morning, when construction workers stumbled upon something they weren't expecting: a grave hidden beneath layers of dirt and time. The discovery happened almost by accident. A team of workers had been clearing land on the outskirts of town to make way for a new housing development. As they dug deeper into the earth, their shovels hit something hard. Curious, they brushed away the soil and uncovered what appeared to be an old wooden box. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than discarded debris from decades past. But as they pried it open, their curiosity turned to unease. Inside lay human bones, brittle, yellowed with age, but unmistakably human. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered at the site, murmuring among themselves. Some speculated it might belong to a long-lost pioneer, or perhaps someone who had wandered into the woods and never returned. Others whispered darker theories, that this could be evidence of foul play, buried along with its victim. Whatever. The truth was, one thing was certain: this unmarked grave held a story waiting to be told. Among those drawn to the scene was Clara Bennett, a local historian known for her fascination with the forgotten corners of Willow Creek's past. In her late 30s, Clara had spent years poring over dusty archives, piecing together fragments of history that others had overlooked. To her, every artifact, every faded photograph, and every crumbling letter was a thread in the tapestry of the town's identity. When she heard about the grave, something stirred inside her, a mix of intrigue and responsibility. She felt compelled to uncover who this person was and why they had been left behind without even a name to mark their resting place. Clara arrived at the site just as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the uneven ground. Air carried a chill that seemed to seep straight into her bones. She watched silently as officials cordoned off the area, snapping photos and taking measurements. Her eyes kept returning to the bones, now carefully laid out on a tarp nearby. They looked fragile, almost delicate, yet they radiated a sense of permanence, as if they had waited patiently for someone to find them. As the day wore on, Clara noticed something glinting amidst the remains. Squinting against the fading light, she leaned closer and saw it, a small rusted locket tangled among the bones. Carefully, she picked it up, feeling its weight in her palm. Despite its tarnished exterior, the locket still held traces of its former beauty. With trembling fingers, she opened it, revealing a faded black-and-white photograph tucked inside. Two young women stared back at her, their faces frozen in time. Both were smiling, their expressions brimming with youthful optimism. One of them had curly hair framing her face, while the other wore a simple ribbon tied around her neck. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that these two girls had once shared a bond stronger than friendship, a connection cut short by tragedy. Her heart raced as she studied the image. Who were these women? What had brought them here to this lonely patch of earth? And why had they been separated so abruptly? Questions swirled in Clara's mind like leaves caught in a gust of wind. She knew instinctively that this wasn't just another forgotten relic of the past. This locket, and the grave it came from, was hiding something far more profound. That night, unable to sleep, Clara sat at her kitchen table, the locket resting in front of her under the warm glow of a lamp. She traced its edges with her fingertips, trying to imagine the hands that had last touched it. Had it belonged to one of the women in the photograph? If so, which one? And what had happened to her companion? The more Clara thought about it, the more convinced she became that this discovery was linked to a chapter of Willow Creek's history that had been deliberately erased, or at least buried alongside its victim. The next morning, Clara visited the town library, determined to dig up any information she could find. She started with newspaper archives from the early to mid-20th century, flipping through brittle pages filled with advertisements for soda fountains and announcements of church socials. It wasn't until she reached the summer of 1957 that she found something intriguing: a brief article about a missing teenager named Emily Dawson. According to the report, Emily had disappeared without explanation during the height of summer, leaving behind only confusion and unanswered questions. The police had searched extensively, but ultimately closed the case due to lack of evidence. Emily's disappearance had sent shockwaves through Willow Creek at the time, though details were scarce. Some townsfolk claimed she had run away after being ostracized for her rumored involvement with a married man. Others hinted at darker possibilities, suggesting foul play but offering no proof. Either way, Emily had vanished from public memory, as swiftly as she had vanished from the town itself. Clara felt a jolt of recognition as she read the name Emily Dawson. Could this be the woman in the locket? If so, who was the second girl in the photograph? And why had Emily ended up in an unmarked grave? Each question only deepened the mystery, pulling Clara further into its orbit. Over the following days, Clara became consumed by her quest for answers. She spent hours combing through records, interviewing elderly residents and visiting sites connected to Emily's life. With each new clue, the story grew more complex and more haunting. Yet despite the growing weight of the mystery, Clara couldn't turn away. Something about Emily's fate resonated deeply with her, as if the young woman's voice was calling out from beyond the grave, begging to be heard. Little did Clara know, this journey would lead her not only into the heart of Willow Creek's darkest secrets but also into the shadowy corners of her own soul. For buried alongside Emily's bones was a truth so tragic, so unimaginable, that it would change everything Clara thought she knew about her hometown and herself. The more Clara dug into the past, the clearer it became that Willow Creek wasn't just a sleepy little town. It was a place haunted by secrets. Secrets whispered in hushed tones behind closed doors. Secrets buried deep beneath layers of time and denial. As she pieced together fragments of Emily Dawson's life, Clara began to see how tightly woven these secrets were into the fabric of the community. And with each new discovery, the air around her seemed heavier, as if the weight of decades-old guilt was pressing down on her shoulders. Clara started her investigation at the local library, flipping through yellowed newspapers and brittle records from the 1950s. The summer of 1957 came alive in faded ink, stories about 4th of July, parades, church picnics, and high school baseball games. But beneath the cheerful veneer of small-town life, there were cracks. One article stood out, a brief mention of Emily Dawson's disappearance. It described her as a popular teenager who had vanished without explanation. There was no dramatic headline, no sense of urgency, just a short paragraph tucked away on page 3, almost like an afterthought. What struck Clara most was how quickly the story disappeared from public view. After a week or two, there were no follow-up reports, no updates on the search efforts. It was as if the town had collectively decided to move on, leaving Emily behind. This silence felt unnatural, even sinister. People didn't simply vanish, without a trace, not in a town where everyone knew everyone else. Something must have happened to make them stop looking, or maybe something had happened to ensure they wouldn't look too closely. Determined to uncover more, Clara turned to older residents who might remember Emily. She visited retirement homes, coffee shops, and front porches armed with her questions and the photograph from the locket. Most people were polite but evasive, offering vague answers or changing the subject. A few admitted they remembered Emily but refused to say much beyond, describing her as a sweet girl or full of life. It was clear they didn't want to talk about her, or what had happened to her. One name kept coming up in her conversations: Sarah Monroe. According to those willing to speak, Sarah had been Emily's best friend since childhood. They did everything together, attended school dances, shared secrets late into the night, and spent lazy afternoons skipping stones at Willow Creek's lake. Their bond was so strong that some referred to them as two halves of the same soul. But then something changed. Rumors hinted at jealousy, betrayal, and arguments between the two girls in the months leading up to Emily's disappearance. Whatever had driven them apart, it left scars that never fully healed. Clara's curiosity about Sarah grew when she stumbled upon a series of letters tucked away in the attic of the old Monroe house, which had been abandoned for years. Dust coated every surface and cobwebs hung like curtains, but the letters were remarkably well preserved. Written in neat cursive, they revealed glimpses of Sarah's inner world, a mix of admiration for Emily and simmering resentment. In one letter dated just weeks before Emily vanished, Sarah wrote bitterly about feeling overshadowed by her friend. "She gets all the attention," Sarah confided to an unnamed recipient. "Everyone loves her, while I'm just invisible." As Clara read through the letters, a troubling picture emerged. Sarah's words painted her as someone desperate for validation, someone who felt trapped in Emily's shadow. Yet there was also a raw vulnerability in her tone, a longing for acceptance that made Clara feel uneasy. Was this enough to drive someone to harm their closest friend? Or was there more to the story? Her search took another turn when she discovered mentions of Reverend Jonathan Hayes, the town's preacher during the 1950s. Tall, charismatic, and deeply respected, he had been a pillar of the community. But whispers suggested he harbored forbidden feelings for Emily. Some claimed they'd seen him lingering outside her window late at night. Others spoke of heated arguments between him and Sarah. Clara couldn't help but wonder if his involvement went beyond mere affection, if he had played a role in whatever fate befell Emily. The deeper Clara ventured into the past, the more she noticed strange things happening around her. Doors would creak open on their own, even when there was no breeze. Shadows moved across walls in ways that defied logic. Once, while reading late into the night, she heard faint footsteps upstairs. Though she lived alone, at first she dismissed these occurrences as products of her imagination, fueled by exhaustion and the eerie nature of her research. But then came the dreams. Night after night, Clara dreamed of a young woman standing in a dense forest, her face obscured by mist. The woman reached out to her, pleading silently for help. Though Clara couldn't see her clearly, she recognized the ribbon tied around her neck, the same one worn by the girl in the locket's photograph. Each dream ended the same way, with the woman collapsing to her knees, clutching her chest as if struggling to breathe. When Clara woke, her heart pounded and the image lingered in her mind like smoke refusing to dissipate. These experiences unnerved her, but they also strengthened her resolve. Someone, or something, wanted her to keep going, to uncover the truth no matter the cost. Still, not everyone in Willow Creek shared her determination. As word of her investigation spread, resistance began to build. Anonymous notes appeared on her doorstep, warning her to stop digging. Her car tires were slashed one morning, forcing her to walk miles to work. Even friends urged her to let sleeping dogs lie, insisting that some secrets were better left buried. But Clara couldn't ignore the growing sense that she was onto something monumental. Every clue pointed to a web of lies spun decades ago, a web designed to protect powerful figures in the town. Sarah, Jonathan, and perhaps others. They all seemed connected to Emily's disappearance in ways that weren't immediately clear. What had really happened that summer? Why had Emily been ostracized? And why had her body been hidden in an unmarked grave? One evening, as Clara sat at her desk surrounded by stacks of papers and photographs, she realized she was no longer searching for answers solely for Emily's sake. This mystery had become personal, tugging at threads within herself she hadn't known existed. The ghosts of Willow Creek weren't just haunting its streets, they were haunting her too. And until she uncovered the truth, she suspected they wouldn't rest. With renewed determination, Clara vowed to push forward no matter the obstacles. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she also knew she couldn't turn back. Somewhere in the shadows of the past lay a tragic truth waiting to be brought into the light, and Clara was determined to be the one to reveal it. As Clara continued her investigation, the tangled web of relationships surrounding Emily Dawson began to unravel like threads pulled from an old sweater. Each new discovery brought her closer to understanding the tragedy that had unfolded in Willow Creek decades earlier, but it also deepened the mystery, revealing layers of deceit and betrayal that shocked even someone as seasoned in uncovering secrets as Clara. One afternoon, while sifting through dusty boxes in the town's historical society archives, Clara stumbled upon a collection of letters written by Sarah Monroe. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic at times, as if Sarah had been pouring out her thoughts in moments of desperation. These weren't just casual notes or diary entries. They were confessions, raw and unfiltered, offering glimpses into a mind torn between love and jealousy, guilt and anger. In one letter, dated several months before Emily's disappearance, Sarah wrote about how much she admired her best friend. "Emily is everything I wish I could be," she confessed. "She's beautiful, clever, kind. Everyone loves her." But as Clara read further, the tone shifted. Sarah described feeling invisible next to Emily, overshadowed by her charm and popularity. "Sometimes I hate her for it," Sarah admitted. "Why does she get all the attention? Why can't people see me?" These words sent a chill down Clara's spine. They painted a portrait of a young woman consumed by envy, struggling to reconcile her feelings of admiration with her growing resentment. It wasn't hard to imagine how such emotions might spiral out of control, especially in a tight-knit community where everyone's actions were scrutinized. Yet Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's jealousy wasn't the only factor at play. Her suspicions grew when she found references to Reverend Jonathan Hayes scattered throughout Sarah's writings. At first, his name appeared innocuously enough, mentions of church sermons or community events he had organized. But as Clara delved deeper, the nature of their connection became clearer and darker. In one particularly chilling passage, Sarah accused Emily of stealing something precious from her. "How could you do this to me?" Sarah wrote, though she didn't specify what had been taken. "You knew how I felt about him." It didn't take long for Clara to piece together the implication. Emily and Jonathan had shared some kind of relationship, or at least Sarah believed they had. Whether it was real or imagined, the accusation must have stung deeply. For someone as insecure as Sarah, the thought of losing not only her best friend but also the man she cared for would have been unbearable. Clara's heart raced as she realized the gravity of what she was reading. This wasn't just a story of friendship gone sour. It was a triangle of forbidden desires, misunderstandings, and festering resentment. And somewhere in the middle of it all lay Emily, caught between two people who claimed to care for her but may have ultimately betrayed her trust. But the most disturbing revelation came later, buried among pages filled with rambling thoughts and fragmented memories. In a letter dated just days before Emily disappeared, Sarah described a heated confrontation with her friend. "I told her the truth," Sarah wrote. "I told her she was selfish, cruel, a liar. She tried to deny it, but I saw the guilt in her eyes. She knows what she did." The letter ended abruptly, leaving Clara with more questions than answers. What exactly had Sarah confronted Emily about? Was it related to Jonathan, or was there something else entirely? And what had happened after that argument? Had it escalated into violence? Determined to find out, Clara decided to visit the old cabin mentioned in some of Sarah's writings. According to the letters, it had been a secret meeting place for the three of them during their teenage years, a spot deep in the woods where they could escape prying eyes. Though abandoned for decades, Clara hoped it might still hold clues to what had transpired that fateful summer. The journey to the cabin was anything but easy. The path leading there had long since been reclaimed by nature, forcing Clara to navigate through thick underbrush and uneven terrain. By the time she reached her destination, sweat soaked her shirt and scratches marred her arms. But none of that mattered when she saw the cabin standing before her, a dilapidated structure leaning precariously to one side, its wooden walls weathered gray with age. Inside, the air smelled of damp earth and decay. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the roof, illuminating piles of debris scattered across the floor. Clara moved cautiously, her footsteps echoing softly against the silence. Then, tucked beneath a loose floorboard near the fireplace, she found what she had been searching for, a leather-bound journal belonging to Sarah. The entries inside confirmed Clara's worst fears. In painstaking detail, Sarah recounted the events leading up to Emily's disappearance. She described how their final argument had spiraled out of control, culminating in physical violence. "I didn't mean to hurt her," Sarah wrote, her words trembling with emotion. But she wouldn't listen. She wouldn't stop screaming. I panicked. I didn't know what else to do. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she turned the page. There, in stark black ink, was the confession she had been dreading. Sarah had buried Emily alive. "I couldn't let anyone find her," Sarah admitted. "If they knew what I'd done, I couldn't bear it. So I dug a hole in the woods far away from here and laid her to rest. I said a prayer over her body, hoping God would forgive me." Tears blurred Clara's vision as she absorbed the enormity of what she had uncovered. This wasn't just a tragic accident or a misunderstanding. It was murder. Sarah's jealousy and rage had driven her to commit an unspeakable act, one that haunted her until the day she died. According to the journal, Sarah had taken her own life shortly afterward, unable to live with the weight of her guilt. Yet Clara couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for Sarah, too. Her actions were monstrous, yes, but they were born out of pain and insecurity. She had been a victim of her own emotions, trapped in a cycle of longing and despair that ultimately destroyed everyone involved. As Clara left the cabin, clutching the journal tightly in her hands, she felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because she finally had the answers she had been seeking, and dread because she knew the truth would shatter the fragile peace of Willow Creek. The town had spent decades pretending nothing had happened, sweeping Emily's memory under the rug along with the sins of those who had wronged her. Now Clara had the power to expose it all. But as she made her way back home, one question lingered in her mind. Was she prepared to face the consequences of bringing these secrets to light? The locket Clara had discovered in the grave became more than just a piece of jewelry. It was now the key to unlocking the darkest chapter of Willow Creek's history. Every detail etched into its worn surface seemed to whisper secrets from the past, urging her to dig deeper. Inside, besides the faded photograph, Clara found something she hadn't noticed before: a tiny scrap of paper folded neatly within the locket. It was brittle with age, but when she carefully unfolded it, she saw faint handwriting scrawled across the fragile sheet. The words were barely legible, smudged by time and moisture. But one thing stood out clearly: a partial address. Intrigued, Clara stared at the scribbled text for several moments, her mind racing. Was this Emily's handwriting? Or had someone else tucked the note inside the locket as a clue? The address wasn't complete, only a street name and a number, but it was enough to give her a direction. She recognized the road immediately. It led to an isolated part of the woods on the outskirts of town, far from where anyone lived today. Her heart pounded as she realized this could be the location Sarah had mentioned in her journal, the place where Emily's body had been buried after that fateful confrontation. Determined to follow the trail, Clara packed a flashlight, gloves, and a small shovel into her bag. She knew venturing into the woods alone wasn't wise, but the urgency of the moment outweighed her caution. As she drove toward the address, the landscape grew wilder, the roads narrower, and the trees denser. By the time she parked her car and stepped onto the overgrown path, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows through the forest. The air felt heavier here, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made her jump, her nerves stretched taut like piano strings. Following the directions on the scrap of paper, she eventually came upon an old cabin hidden deep among the trees. Its wooden walls were warped and gray, its windows boarded up, and vines crept up its sides as if nature itself were trying to reclaim it. This had to be the place Sarah had described in her journal, the secret meeting spot where everything had unraveled. Clara hesitated outside the cabin, her breath catching in her throat. Something about the structure felt ominous, as though it carried the weight of all the pain and betrayal that had occurred within its walls. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The interior was dimly lit, the floor covered in dust and debris. In the center of the room, near what remained of a stone fireplace, she spotted a loose floorboard. Kneeling down, she pried it up with trembling hands. Beneath the floorboard lay a stack of journals wrapped in oilcloth, likely placed there to protect them from the elements. Clara carefully unwrapped the bundle and opened the topmost journal. The pages were filled with Sarah Monroe's handwriting, her confessions, her fears, her guilt. Each entry painted a vivid picture of a young woman consumed by jealousy, insecurity, and regret. But it was the final entry that chilled Clara to her core. In painstaking detail, Sarah recounted the night of Emily's death. She described how their argument had escalated into violence, how Emily had pleaded for mercy, and how Sarah, blinded by rage and panic, had silenced her forever. "I couldn't let her leave," Sarah wrote. "She would have told everyone what I'd done, so I buried her where no one would find her. I prayed every day that God would forgive me, but I know He never will." Clara's hands trembled as she read the words. She felt a surge of sorrow for Emily, whose life had been cut short so cruelly, and even a flicker of pity for Sarah, who had been destroyed by her own actions. But mostly she felt anger, not just at Sarah, but at the entire town of Willow Creek. For decades they had turned a blind eye, allowing Emily's memory to fade into obscurity, while those responsible went unpunished. With the journals safely tucked into her bag, Clara returned to the site of the unmarked grave. Standing there, surrounded by towering trees and the quiet hum of insects, she felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Emily deserved justice, not just for herself, but for the truth she represented. The truth about human frailty, betrayal, and redemption. Clara resolved to share Sarah's writings with the world, ensuring that Emily's story would finally be heard. But as she prepared to leave, she noticed something glinting in the dirt near the edge of the excavation. Bending down, she unearthed another small object, a silver ring engraved with delicate floral patterns. It was simple yet elegant, the kind of keepsake someone might wear every day. Turning it over in her palm, Clara realized it must have belonged to Emily. Perhaps it had slipped off during the struggle, or maybe Sarah had removed it as a final act of cruelty. Whatever the case, the ring felt like a tangible connection to the girl in the photograph, a reminder of the life stolen from her. Clutching the ring tightly, Clara made her way back to her car. As she drove home, her mind raced with plans. She would take the journals and the locket to the authorities, forcing them to reopen the case. She would organize a memorial service for Emily, inviting descendants of those involved to confront the past together. And most importantly, she would write about everything she had uncovered, ensuring that Emily's voice was heard loud and clear. That night, as Clara sat at her kitchen table poring over the journals, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. The supernatural occurrences that had plagued her earlier, the creaking doors, the shadowy figures, the haunting dreams, had ceased entirely. It was as if Emily's spirit had finally found rest, knowing that her story was being brought into the light. Clara knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she was ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. For the first time in weeks, she slept soundly, the weight of the mystery lifting just enough to let her breathe freely again. Yet even as she drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in her mind. Uncovering the truth was only the beginning. The real test would come when she tried to make others see it and accept it. Clara knew that bringing Emily's story to light wouldn't be easy. The truth she had uncovered wasn't just uncomfortable, it was explosive. It threatened to shatter the carefully constructed facade of Willow Creek, exposing decades-old secrets and forcing people to confront sins they'd rather forget. But Clara was determined. She couldn't let Emily's memory remain buried any longer. Justice demanded more than silence. It required action. The first step was sharing her findings with the authorities. Armed with Sarah's journals, the locket, and the silver ring, Clara visited Sheriff Dan Harper, a grizzled man in his late 50s who had grown up hearing whispers about Emily Dawson's disappearance. At first he listened skeptically, leaning back in his chair with arms crossed. "You're telling me this grave belongs to Emily?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "And you think Sarah Monroe killed her?" Clara nodded, laying out the evidence piece by piece. She showed him the journal entries detailing Sarah's confession, the photograph inside the locket linking Emily to the grave, and even the partial address that had led her to the cabin. As she spoke, she watched skepticism give way to grim understanding on the sheriff's face. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "This is going to stir up a hornet's nest," he muttered. "People around here don't like digging up the past." Despite his reluctance, the sheriff agreed to reopen the case. A team of investigators was sent to examine the gravesite and collect further evidence. News of the investigation spread quickly through Willow Creek, sparking a mix of curiosity and unease among residents. Some were eager for answers, while others bristled at the idea of dredging up old wounds. Clara received both support and hostility, in equal measure, anonymous phone calls warning her to stop, as well as messages of gratitude from those who believed the truth needed to come out. Encouraged by the progress, Clara decided to take matters into her own hands. She organized a memorial service for Emily, inviting anyone connected to the case or simply interested in honoring her memory to attend. Flyers were posted around town, announcing the event at the local church. On the appointed day, a modest crowd gathered beneath the stained glass windows, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity, sorrow, and apprehension. As Clara stood before them, holding the locket and the silver ring, she felt a surge of nerves. This was her moment to ensure Emily's voice was heard. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. "Emily Dawson was only 17 when her life was tragically cut short," Clara said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "For over 60 years she lay forgotten in an unmarked grave, her story buried along with her body. But today we honor her memory, and we acknowledge the truth." She recounted what she had discovered, the friendship between Emily and Sarah, the jealousy that turned deadly, and the role Reverend Jonathan Hayes may have played in the tragedy. As she read excerpts from Sarah's journals, the room fell silent, the weight of the words sinking in. When she finished, there was a long pause before an elderly woman in the front row slowly rose to her feet. Her name was Margaret Ellis, and she introduced herself as Sarah Monroe's niece. Though frail and trembling, her voice carried a quiet strength. "I never knew my aunt very well," Margaret began, glancing down at her hands. "She took her own life not long after Emily disappeared, leaving behind only rumors and guilt. Growing up, I always wondered why she did it, but no one would talk about it." She paused, tears welling in her eyes. "Now I know the truth, and I'm sorry. For Emily, for Sarah, and for everyone whose lives were touched by this tragedy." Margaret's admission broke the dam. One by one, others stepped forward to share fragments of the story they had pieced together over the years. An older man recalled seeing Sarah crying hysterically near the woods the night Emily vanished. A woman spoke of overhearing hushed arguments between Sarah and Reverend Hayes. Even Sheriff Harper admitted that his father, who had been deputy at the time, once mentioned suspicions about foul play but was ordered to keep quiet. The atmosphere in the church shifted dramatically. What had started as a somber gathering transformed into a collective reckoning. People hugged each other, cried openly, and vowed to make amends for their ancestors' complicity in silencing Emily. For the first time in decades, Willow Creek faced its past head-on, acknowledging the pain and injustice that had festered beneath its surface. Afterward, Clara approached Margaret, thanking her for her courage. "Your aunt made terrible choices," Clara said gently. "But maybe this can be a chance for healing for all of us." Margaret nodded, clutching a tissue in trembling hands. "I've spent my whole life wondering why my family never talked about Sarah. Now I understand why, but I also see how important it is to break the cycle of silence. Thank you for giving us that chance." With the town rallying behind her, Clara worked tirelessly to ensure Emily's memory would never fade again. She collaborated with local officials to design a proper headstone for the grave, inscribed with simple yet powerful words, "Emily Dawson, beloved daughter and friend. Rest in peace." A ceremony was held to unveil the stone, drawing a larger crowd than anyone expected. Flowers piled high around the grave, and candles flickered softly in the evening breeze. Yet Clara's work didn't end there. Determined to preserve Emily's legacy, She wrote a book chronicling her investigation and the revelations that followed. Titled, Beneath the Shadows, Unearthing Emily Dawson's Story, it became a testament to the power of truth and resilience. The book gained national attention, inspiring readers across the country to reflect on their own community's hidden histories. Journalists reached out to interview Clara, historians praised her dedication, and families affected by similar tragedies contacted her seeking advice. Through it all, Clara remained grounded, aware that the journey had changed her profoundly. She had started out as a curious historian chasing clues, but she ended up becoming something more. A voice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. Emily's story reminded her that even the darkest truths could lead to healing, if people had the courage to face them. One crisp morning, weeks after the memorial service, Clara returned to the gravesite alone. The air smelled of fresh earth and pine needles, and sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the ground. Kneeling beside the headstone, she placed a single white rose atop the soil. "Thank you, Emily," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. "Your story mattered, it still matters." As she stood to leave, Clara noticed something unusual, a faint warmth in the air as though the sun had suddenly brightened. For a brief moment she thought she heard laughter, the carefree sound of young girls playing together. Smiling to herself, she walked away, knowing that Emily's spirit had finally found peace. And as she drove back toward town, the road ahead seemed clearer, brighter, and full of hope. Months had passed since the unveiling of Emily Dawson's headstone, and Willow Creek was beginning to heal. The town that once prided itself on its quiet charm and unspoken rules now carried a different energy, one of reflection and renewal. People spoke openly about the past, sharing stories they had kept hidden for years. Conversations that were once avoided became opportunities for connection. Clara watched as the community slowly transformed, not just in how it remembered Emily, but also in how it viewed itself. The memorial service had sparked something powerful within the residents. Families began reaching out to one another, apologizing for misunderstandings passed down through generations. Old grudges dissolved under the weight of shared grief and newfound understanding. Even Margaret Ellis, Sarah Monroe's niece, became a quiet advocate for change. She started hosting informal gatherings at her home, inviting neighbors to share their own experiences of loss or regret. These meetings weren't formal therapy sessions. They were more like storytelling circles, where people could speak freely, without judgment. It was a small step, but it made a world of difference. Clara found herself deeply moved by these changes. She had always believed in the power of history to shape the present, but she hadn't anticipated how profoundly uncovering Emily's story would impact those around her. Strangers approached her in grocery stores and coffee shops, thanking her for giving them permission to confront their own buried truths. Some admitted they had long suspected something sinister about Emily's disappearance, but didn't know how to bring it up. Others confessed they had judged Emily harshly during her lifetime, believing the rumors spread by jealous peers. Hearing their words filled Clara with both sadness and hope. Sadness for what Emily had endured, and hope that her sacrifice might lead to lasting growth. As the seasons shifted from autumn to winter, Clara dedicated herself to writing Beneath the Shadows, unearthing Emily Dawson's story. Sitting at her desk each evening, surrounded by photographs, letters, and notes, she poured her heart into every chapter. The book wasn't just a retelling of events. It was an exploration of human nature, the fragility of trust, the destructiveness of jealousy, and the resilience required to seek justice. Clara wanted readers to see Emily not as a tragic figure defined solely by her death, but as a vibrant, young woman whose life deserved celebration. When the book was finally published, it resonated far beyond Willow Creek. Reviews praised Clara's meticulous research and empathetic storytelling, calling the work a testament to the enduring power of truth. Media outlets across the country picked up the story, eager to highlight the courage of a small-town historian who refused to let history fade into obscurity. Requests for interviews flooded in, and Clara traveled to cities she'd never visited before, speaking to audiences hungry for reminders of why confronting the past matters. But the most meaningful responses came from ordinary people who reached out to Clara after reading the book. A mother wrote to say the story inspired her to mend a strained relationship with her daughter. A teacher described using excerpts from the book in class discussions about forgiveness and accountability. One letter stood out. A man named Richard confessed he had spent decades blaming himself for failing to protect his younger sister, who had gone missing when they were children. Reading about Emily helped him realize he wasn't alone in carrying such guilt. "Your book gave me permission to grieve," he wrote. "Thank you for reminding me that even broken things can be mended." Back in Willow Creek, the legacy of Emily Dawson continued to inspire acts of kindness and remembrance. Every year on the anniversary of her death, townspeople gathered at her grave to pay their respects. They brought flowers, lit candles, and shared memories, not just of Emily but of others whose lives had been touched by tragedy. The event evolved into a community-wide tradition, blending sorrow with gratitude and solidarity. Children learned about Emily in school, ensuring that future generations would remember her name and honor her memory. For Clara, these moments of connection reaffirmed her belief in the importance of her work, though she still felt pangs of sadness. When thinking about Emily's fate, she also felt immense pride in knowing she had played a role in bringing light to the shadows. Her nights were no longer haunted by dreams of the mysterious woman in the forest. Instead, she dreamed of laughter, the joyful sound of two girls skipping stones by the lake, their friendship untainted by jealousy or betrayal. Yet Clara couldn't help but wonder what Emily would think if she could see the impact her story had made. Would she feel vindicated, peaceful, or would she simply wish for the chance to live the life stolen from her? These questions lingered in Clara's mind, unanswered, but somehow comforting. She liked to imagine Emily watching over Willow Creek, smiling at the way her memory had united a fractured community. One chilly spring morning, Clara returned to the gravesite for what had become her regular visit. The air smelled of blooming wildflowers and birds chirped cheerfully overhead. As she knelt beside the headstone, she noticed something new, a tiny bouquet of daisies tied with a ribbon. Someone else had been here recently, leaving their own token of remembrance. Smiling softly, Clara placed her hand on the cool surface of the stone. "Thank you, Emily," she whispered, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "You've given us so much more than answers. You've shown us how to face our fears, embrace our flaws, and find beauty in the broken pieces." As she walked back toward town, Clara felt lighter than she had in months. The road ahead was still uncertain, but it was brighter now, illuminated by the lessons Emily's story had taught them all. Justice may have come too late for Emily Dawson, but her legacy lived on, in the hearts of those who loved her, in the pages of Clara's book, and in the renewed spirit of a town determined to build a better future. And though Clara knew the journey wasn't truly over, that there would always be more secrets waiting to be uncovered, she faced it with a sense of purpose stronger than ever before. For in seeking the truth, she had discovered not only Emily's story but also her own.